Hello and welcome to the I3 lecture series hosted by the Masters in Digital Photography here at the School of Visual Arts. I'm Tom Ash, and I'm chair of the program. This spring 2023 season is curated by our wonderful faculty member, Elizabeth Avedon. On her behalf, I'm so happy to introduce our speaker, artist, photographer, and filmmaker, Joni Sternbach. Over the course of a career spanning many decades, Joni's portrait-based work explores the variety of themes, including domesticity and the family, and sexuality and the body. Issues of gender identity and feminism were the most crucial themes of her early work from the 1980s, 80s to the 1990s, where the female figure, including her own, were a central motif. In her current work, Joni experiments with a variety of historic photographic processes and is best known for her wet plate collodion tintype portraits of surfers and surfboards made around the globe. Joni received her BFA in photography here at the School of Visual Arts and, and an MA from New York University and the International Center of Photography, where she taught for over a decade. She's an advisory board member and a faculty member at the Penumbra Foundation here in New York City, where she currently teaches. Joni's work is held in many institutions and public collections, including the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, the High Museum, National Portrait Gallery in London, the Joslin Museum, Museum of Contemporary Art in Jacksonville, the Nelson Atkins Museum, and the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston. She's the recipient of several grants, including ones from the New York Foundation for the Arts and the Creative Arts Public Service Program, as well as the Santo Foundation. Please join me in welcoming back to SVA, Joni Sternbach.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming out tonight. I really appreciate it, the first day of spring. I'm thrilled to be here to talk to students, friends, and maybe possible future friends. So let's go. This photograph is of my two cousins and my grandmother. It was taken in Florida, and I've used this image to describe my attraction to the ocean. It began with my grandmother and her bungalow in Rockaway, where my cousins and I visited often. And coupled with the ocean was the glamour and the social connections that my grandmother, my mother, and her friends so easily made. Just to give you a little taste of where I come from. This is where I grew up, and while an undergrad at the School of Visual Arts, I made this photograph of the family home with a large format camera. As you could see, I didn't have any lessons in leveling yet. While at school, I tried to find my voice. That is, if I had one. My pictures were of the people and the places that I knew. This is my friend Aline. I photographed strangers, my family, and myself. And later, my cousin Lana, who lived in the Bronx. I was influenced by the time in which I became a photographer. Robert Frank and the social documentary style was the one I gravitated towards. My aunt, cousin, and I were all close, so it wasn't hard to visit, spend time, and take pictures. I photographed Lana and her friends over a period of several months, and then we got to know each other much better. We hung out, she had dance parties. So we had a little fun. This was the 1970s. But as we got closer, things got more complicated and took a different direction. Without saying too much, I was asked to destroy a certain negative and to stop coming around. which I did and didn't do. But I show you all this to reveal that while I thought I had a direction, I didn't really. I was looking. I was thinking. What can I express that is authentic and yet also meaningful? How do I find my subject matter? I was attracted to the social landscape. That's where I first found my voice, or maybe better said, where I found my first voice. Reflecting back on other people, I could tell a story of a city, of a place, and the people in that place. I could go to one very specific location in this huge metropolis and find a stage full of characters, mostly unaware and uncaring if they were noticed. I can say this now, but I did not know this then, that my vision was a projection, and although I photographed strangers, I was really exploring my own understanding of what it meant to be a young woman, alone, independent, and in a family, through the lens of a Leica in the New York City subway in the 1970s. Fast forward to 1983 in the series Something Between the Two of Them, when I began working with a vintage Rollei and later a Hasselblad and in color. After the premature birth of my first child, I turned the lens the other way around to explore ideas of motherhood, womanhood, feminism and maternity, sometimes alcohol, and marriage. I was interested in exploring gender roles with a dash of humor, so I created a narrative drama, part fact, part fiction, incorporating aspects of my own experience. Fast forward again to 1992. Postgraduate school where I learned a few alternative and historic printing techniques, and I combined it with my fascination for the silhouette in 19th century photography. Inspired by Muybridge's study of the human figure in motion, I began isolating single frames from this study of women, which for scientific purposes, of course, was done in the nude. These women were holding objects associated with domesticity, femininity, while the male nudes in the series all held objects associated with masculinity and manliness. So using the silhouette as a device, I masked the the nudity of the women, creating a feminist context for these women to float in. The female nude in the context of photographic history has mostly been a male view. My decision to silhouette each woman was a way to obstruct this age-old gaze. The images of the women are all printed by contact with platinum palladium on what may be hard to see on the previous slides, but are two separate sheets of paper joined together somewhere mid-body to create a whole and mostly floating image. The men were made later on, and I found a way to shoot them without having to go through that whole rigmarole of doing them in half. Fast forward again to the end of the 1990s, when after a year of living abroad, I had a kind of breakup with photography, and I felt that photography was not the only way I could express myself. When I began School of Visual Arts, I was in the Fine Arts department, and I decided to rekindle my drawing skills. I decided to use photography as a tool to another means. I gathered old and new photographs, and I created a fake narrative. On the left is a portrait of me as a teenager, and on the right, my son at approximately the same age. Playing with the idea of time, I created this impossible connection. These are my parents at my brother's bar mitzvah. So after about a year of watercolor drawing, I found my way back to photography. The first series that drew me to the Bluffs was Ocean Details, started in 1999. The work began as a meditative study, an exploration of surface, form, abstraction, and emotion. Perched at the edge of the bluff was just me and my large format camera making black and white portraits of the ocean surface. I was inspired by people like Richard Misrach with his sublime photographs of political sites, and also Hiroshi Sugimoto and V.S. Selmans. I began my work by concentrating on the feelings that I got from these images. I believed the ocean to be an emotional landscape, and I wanted to explore these ideas. This was my first attempt into landscape photography, and I continued to explore print processes to see which ones suited the project best. These were made platinum palladium, and I wanted to give the work a tactile and handmade feel. But as you all know, contact prints are kind of small, so I also made them extremely large as a wallpaper. There was a bit of a procedure to creating these pictures with the equipment I had. It required a high vantage point so I could frame the ocean without the horizon. I needed the water to be close to the edge of the bluff so it could fill the frame. So I started listening to the weather radio and timing my trips to be there only at high tide. And I needed a long enough lens plus a reducing back for my camera so that I could zero in on this tiny little rectangle of oceanic surface without the sky. As a result, most of my negatives are 5x7. I worked for years, in all seasons, in all weather. My focus was the creative and formal elements of interpreting water, but my awareness of the landscape as a political point of view, an endangered resource, was growing. So drawing attention to the ocean and water in general became more important as global water concerns became more urgent. I photographed at the same location for many years, and the Sea Sky series followed quite naturally. Arranging the frame with a minimal amount of water and mostly sky was a way to stay close to this particular landscape, but to also shake it up a bit. Until eventually this happened. The first time that I realized that the place where I'd been shooting all winter long was a surf break, I put 2 fingers in my mouth and I whistled at these folks to get out of my frame. They did not move, except forward. Initially, I considered surfers interlopers into my pristine and empty landscape. Then I began to see that this was a place we were all interacting in, that it was a shared environment, and that it was important to pay attention to that. These people inhabited the landscape, and maybe they were there for a reason. In this particular image, the surfers give a sense of scale and importance to the landscape. And it's also hard to tell if they're fish or human. So it's precisely this comparison and confusion that my tintype portraits also hope to address. For me, surfers are primal. They're so much a part of the ocean landscape that I'm surprised I avoided them for so long. And maybe more importantly, is that what I'm trying to do by photographing surfers fits so well with what they're trying to do, just by being surfers. Surfland originated at Ditch Plains in Montauk in 2006, and it is my longest project to date. I wanted to consider a name or a title that would suggest a mythic idea of surfing and to place it in a landscape that sounds as real as any country, like Finland or Iceland. What I didn't know at the time was that Surfland does exist, and that the people in my pictures are the inhabitants of this land out of time. Tonight, I'll be telling you about how this project started and where it's evolved to today. And also just enough about the process, not to bore you, but to see how it integrates with my imagery and why I believe it's such a good match, both conceptually and visually. My tintypes are one-of-a-kind positives, sized at 8 by 10, 11 by 14, 14 by 17, and 16 by 20. They're shot on the east and west coast of the United States, Hawaii, Australia, the United Kingdom, France, and Uruguay. And because it's an historic process, better associated with Western geological surveys and Civil War photography than surfers, I thought I'd begin by telling you what goes into my making a tintype. Collodion is a wet process, and it was most popular between 1850 through 1870. It was invented by Frederick Scott Archer in 1851, and in Greek, collodion means glue. It's a chemical, a clear, syrupy liquid composed of gun cotton and ether. Combined with iodides and bromides, it's a base for a photographic emulsion. It can be poured on a variety of substrates, and for this project, I chose blackened metal to make a tintype. The main reason for this was purely practical. A positive image is just an underexposed negative with black behind it, and so it requires a shorter exposure time. Even on the beach with full sun and a fast lens, my exposure times are long enough to capture motion and get blurry pictures. Because it's a wet plate technique, it means that the chemicals are all hand applied, exposed, and developed before the plate dries. Therefore, all my photographs are made start to finish on location with a portable darkroom. And because all my process work is done in the field, I see my pictures instantaneously. And so do my subjects, and this is an interesting and key factor in my work. Having my subjects see their image immediately after it's shot factors into their participation in the project, and it's actually a motivating tool that helps me connect with them and them with me. This is a situation where making a photograph is more than a simple exchange between a photographer and a sitter. It's an interaction, an advertisement on the beach, in public about my project.
So, Lizzie.
Okay, on the 3. I have to say that out loud.
Oh my gosh!
Oh my god.
That is nuts! Oh my god!
The one that's
Whoa! I love that!
It's
Look at this
digital
little man.
photography.
That's like my dad. Oh, I'm getting teary.
So we get some good reactions. This process, which I often describe as the Polaroid of yesteryear, and this way of working quickly became very integral to my making these portraits of surfers. One of the things that I'm trying to do is to use the medium of collodion as a valid contemporary tool. And photographing these individual surf souls is my attempt to understand the surf character. I'm pursuing a sociological and historic document that's captured along the fringe and coastline. Pictures that I hope embody the spirit of freedom and adventure so intrinsic to the human psyche. A subject matter that I don't believe is so well documented by the fine art photography world. I also relate to it as just another choice in photographic medium, the same way that large format represents a valid choice over 35mm or digital versus film. Because the collodion process is so integral to the work, I can't really ignore it when talking about this project. There's an interdependency. The images and process work together to create more than just an actual picture. It's an experience that I share with the people I photograph that couldn't happen any other way. The fact that the speed of collodion is very slow means that my exposures are long, and just how long depends on the chemistry, how fresh it is, the lens I'm using, where I am on the planet, and what time of year it is. Another reason I was attracted to collodion are its characteristics, which I love. However, they're different than traditional film. Collodion is a hand-poured emulsion, so the handmade quality of the image is always present. It renders skin tones differently by making some people look lighter and others much darker. And because it can reveal things unseen by the naked eye, there's a sense of mystery and magic to the process. It seems to have the ability of capturing something essential. Collodion has different color sensitivities than film. It's very sensitive to blue light and insensitive to yellow. Skies often appear blown out and yellow objects are rendered black. This is a comparison shot of a calico fabric shot in collodion on the left and color on the right. And so you could just kind of do a little back and forth and see how collodion interprets different colors. Chance, accident, spontaneity, tide, wind, weather. Those are the ingredients that go into my picture making process. Because all of my work takes place outdoors and my process is wet, it's both weather and time sensitive. There's a lot of satisfaction watching my subjects watch their image clear in the fixer, in daylight, right on the beach in front of them. It never fails to please. Also, because it's on location, I meet and connect with random, interesting, curious, strange, but most often really wonderful people. The beach is a leisure place where people come and go all day long. It's a constantly changing scene. Working in public is a type of performance, and it leaves me open to all kinds of things. My making pictures is also the subject of other people's pictures as well. The spectacle is circular. People are not afraid to engage with me, and while that helps attract sitters, it can also be incredibly distracting. Questions about me, my camera, what am I doing? They're so frequent, sometimes they're incredibly entertaining. How old is my camera? Am I testing the water? Is my dark box a hot dog stand? Am I selling tacos? And my favorite, what time does the puppet show start? It does actually look like a puppet theater. The experience of meeting and finding subjects is one of the most interesting aspects to the project. At first, I began by simply hanging out at the local surfing beach, setting up my camera and dark box and waiting to see what happened. On my first day, Brett came over to me and he inquired about my camera and he asked all about it and, asked what I was doing, and I had told him that I had started a project on photographing surfers and would he be interested in posing? And he said, sure. So we walk out into the water and I plopped the camera down and he said, well, what should I do? And I had never actually directed a surfer before, so I told him to do something which I thought was surf-like. And he gave me a look that made it very clear that that was not appropriate. And I said, well, what do you think you should, how would you like to hold the board? And he showed me how to hold the board and how to take a picture of a surfer. In the first year of the project, I spent a considerable amount of time hanging out on the beach and being assertive, approaching strangers and trying to get people interested in participating. I had this cool little sideshow called a big wooden camera and a historic process to tempt people with, but it was still challenging for me. I still considered myself an introspective landscape photographer. As you can see, I framed all of these pictures with a lot of landscape around them, and I was really holding on to that for a very long time. However, putting oneself in the public eye does garner a certain amount of attention, and quite early on, people liked the idea of surfers, of having their photograph taken, and this was a guy named Mike, and he came over to me, and he asked me to take a picture of him and his dog, and he said he wanted to buy it, and I wasn't particularly interested in selling it. I said, but I'll make you a print if you pose for me. I'll make you a print for free. And so that's what I did, and that was a practice for a while, and it solidified the fact that I was there to make the picture and not to kind of capitalize on making the picture. And it also emphasized the collaborative nature of the project. Coincidentally, Mike also happened to be Jimmy Buffett's manager, and he introduced us. Others have taken liberties with their prints, especially over the holidays. By this time, I think you've figured out that I'm not a surfer. Fun fact, I just discovered that the artist Raymond Pettibone is also not a surfer. I came to this series as an outsider, for good or for bad, and I think this is an important distinction. I arrived here with a sense of discovery. Surfers were not a known quotient. I believe that not knowing what it meant to be a surfer enabled me to explore the subject matter with a sense of freedom and without expectation. As the series developed, I began to understand this subculture of surfers as people who, on a regular basis, seek a connection with nature and unabashedly engage in their quest for joy. To me, they're part human and part animal. It's an endless cycle of coming out of or returning to the sea. If you choose to look at the images from an anthropological point of view, the people in the portraits seem to be both primitive and contemporary. Their surfboards are like symbols or totems, revealing each individual's character. Wetsuits and clothing are another descriptive symbol revealing time, place, and fashion. Because the photographs are positives, both the image and the text reads backwards. This affects the way you understand the picture. Glaring logos appear more like design or hieroglyphics, and brand names are no longer prominent. Cultural anthropology is one field of anthropology that examines culture as a meaningful scientific concept. Cultural anthropologists study cultural variation among humans. They collect observations, usually through participant observation, called fieldwork, and examine the impact of global economic and political processes on local cultural realities. I like that, local cultural realities. As an artist and photographer, I connect with this idea and I recognize my actions as being somewhat akin to fieldwork. I revisit the same location repeatedly. I arrive with my requisite gear. I watch, I wait, and then I interact. In a piece in Huck magazine, the writer Ted Endo mentions Everard M. Thurn, the colonial governor and amateur anthropologist and photographer who in 1893, at the Royal Anthropological Institute in London, presented his famous paper on the photographing of indigenous peoples. My special concern, he said, is as to the use of the camera for the accurate record of these folk regarded as living beings. M. Thurn's main concern was familiarizing the exotic, finding a way for the rigid European imagination to come to terms with a being that was on the surface wholly different from them. Here we are over 120 years later in an age of media oversaturation, and photographers are faced with an inverse problem. Everything looks the same. All kinds of images can be accessed at the click of a button, especially ones of surfers. Paradoxically, photographing people as sentient beings is as hard as ever. I didn't really have a clue when I began this project that I was seeking out the long-lost tribe of surfing right there at my local beach. Most people I photograph only once, and I make only one picture of them, but there are others that I photograph over time. Here's Mike, he's on the right in 2015. And here in 2007 with his triplet siblings. As time went on, I began to learn more about surf culture, in particular surfboards, and what went into the art of making a surfboard. Boards as an object became an attraction and motivation for me to photograph. Crafted of solid wood or a synthetic polymer and often decorated with drawings, graffiti, or scratches, they are powerful idiosyncratic expressions that serve a dual purpose: self-definition and tool to a surfer's joy. Functionally for me, their size and weight help maintain stillness through my long exposures. While photographing in France, I met a surfboard collector who introduced me to his collection, and his son and his friends. There's an architectural element and totemic presence to surfboards. I discovered that surfboard shapers were just as important and legendary as surfers. They're regional, and there are shapers everywhere. This is Ryan Lovelace, a Californian shaper with his wife Katie and his tube shooter. He's a bit of a cult board shaper. This is John Wegner's quiver of wooden alea boards. Rennie Yater was in his 70s when he hauled out this carbon fiber board to the beach. Skip Fry, another legendary surfer, shaper, and activist from San Diego. And this is the surfboard of the legendary Duke Kahanamoku, and the first time I photographed a surfboard without a person. This board was carried to the beach for me by the curator of the Surfing Heritage and Cultural Center, otherwise known as SHAC. It's called the Flying V board. It was made on the beach by Duke for the Vultee family, notice the V in the center, who were in aeronautics and thus the wings and the letter V. And during the pandemic, I published my first book on the surfboard. A few years before, I had begun photographing surfboards from SHAC in San Clemente, where I was finally able to make surf pictures off the beach. And this was a huge change for me, and I thought, oh, hooray, this is going to be so much easier. But no, it was not. However, I came into contact with some very old boards that in themselves told the story of surfing. This is probably one of the oldest boards they have there, the Chief board. I was particularly interested in longboards. in old boards. This one is from the early 1930s. As we know, the swastika is an ancient symbol used especially in South Asia as a symbol of good luck or spirituality. In this case, the manufacturer stopped making this line by the end of the 1930s, and we know why. I don't know if you could see the swastika on top. This board was hand-painted by a Hawaiian mother for her daughter when she entered medical school. And this is from a surfing club in California. This is one of the later boards I photographed, an original lightning bolt from Jerry Lopez. Sometimes we make things out of context. When I first started photographing surfers, I knew next to nothing, or maybe to be more honest, nothing about surf history or surf culture. I just put my tripod and 8x10 camera into the water to make this. And a couple of years later, I was at a bookstore in Portland and I looked at Matt Warshaw's History of Surfing, where I stumbled on this image. It floored me. It was taken in 1890 and it's considered to be one of the first surf photographs. I considered it a sign of affirmation from the gods. I now knew I was doing something intuitively that was connected to the past. Later, when I met Donald Takayama, the legendary Hawaiian shaper, he asked to have his picture taken in the same way. The story goes like this. Long before Kelly Slater was picking up world champion titles for his surfing prowess, the sport was being followed by Hawaiian natives in the 19th century. The missionaries who went to the island after Captain Cook's death in 1789 virtually stamped out all the surfing in Hawaii because they thought it ungodly. At the time, 1890, that first picture I showed you was taken, surfing had been almost wiped out on the island, and it wasn't until 1905 that its future was secured. That year, a youngster called Duka Hanamoku and his friends started their own surfing club, Huinalu, or Club of the Waves. Duke and his friends later became known as the famous Beach Boys of Waikiki, and they're credited with the rebirth of surfing in Hawaii. So when I finally made it to Hawaii in 2017, I couldn't help but remember that photograph and make my own version. This is my cart at the airport traveling to Hawaii with wet plate. This does not include the chemistry darkroom or other sundries. One cannot fly with wet plate chemistry. Many factors aligned in order for me to make the trip to Hawaii, and it opened up yet another new world to me. It's not just the place where I was able to photograph Kelly Slater. I got a window into surf culture like I never had before. I met Eddie Rothman and learned a thing or two about surf houses. And if you see that bottom picture on the right, this is another wet plate photographer who made a book on big wave surfers, and Eddie went through that book and with a Sharpie, and he crossed out and notated it in not such a nice way. He was a little scary. I met Native Hawaiians who were proud to come in traditional cloth and boards to be photographed, and to find willing subjects. Tell me, girls, how do you feel about making pictures with wet plate? Do you like it?
You can answer. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. It's been recorded. The tintype of them. I met Ha'a Keolana, granddaughter of Buffalo Keolana, considered surfing royalty. My work is collaborative. I never work alone. The dark box is taken apart. I also got a gig shooting with Jack Johnson. It did not make the album cover. I was introduced to women lifeguards at Chinaman's Hat. It's always surprising when I look at the color versions of my own shoots. They're so red. Traveling with wet plate is not a new or original idea. Westward development in the United States and the advent of photography ran a parallel route in the 1850s. Many of our photographic forefathers set out to discover new topographies, new people, to document the landscape and also the impact of war. The image on the left is of Nicholas Sparling, Roger Fenton's assistant in the Crimea, now a topic of conversation and war once again. The image on the right is my assistant, Christine, on the salt flats of western Utah. I've read some accounts from Martha Sandweiss's book, Print the Legend, Photography in the American West. She mentioned that photography was thought of back then as having an inherent lack of narrative drama that limited its appeal. But the advent of the wet plate negatives changed the way people thought of the photograph as it finally made an image reproducible. And that was a huge leap forward. So why is it that I've taken a leap backward in time to make a photograph that's not a negative, but rather a one-of-a-kind direct positive, and only reproducible now through current technology? Because in art, there are no rules. But as I said, I was born in the Bronx. Both of my parents were first-generation Americans, also born in the Bronx. My notion of landscape as a young girl was the greenery of the Van Cortlandt Park along the Major Deegan Highway, not the Western Salt Desert. So when in 2006 I was invited to live in a trailer on an abandoned Air Force base in Wendover, Utah, I jumped at it. I took my wet plate gear, and in between salt storms, I made a few pictures. There's a minimal element to the Western landscape, and I went with it. Trains, the industry that divided Great Salt Lake. Pilot Peak and Tales of the Donner Party occupied us. I shot both film and wet collodion and fell in love with the West. The West found its way into my tintype portraits as well. I was invited to a ranch in Santa Barbara where surfland and ranch land converged, and I began making multi-panel plates. These are 3 14 by 11 inch plates from the film The Women in the Waves by Heather Hudson, where I made several group portraits for the film. Little video of my making their tintype. I was interested in making larger pictures and also the idea of sequence. Trey Heighton, a surfer and literature PhD I met, described the oceanic horizon to me and how it has come to hold a new allure of adventure and endless possibility. Surfers, he said, might represent a new icon in Western mythology. The sea, he claims, is the last remaining untamed wilderness, and the image of the surfer has supplanted the place of the cowboy within the American imaginary. Because the traditional cowboy aesthetic has been displaced through enclosure and modernization, the icon of the surfer emerges as the new romantic figure of the American West. This is an idea which I've been thinking about a great deal. I read an article in Surfer magazine by Brad Malekian where they interviewed a rabbi, a priest, and a Buddhist monk to discuss surfing and religion. The upshot from this religious community was that surfing, while not an actual religion, is a spiritual connector. It's like a conduit where one can appreciate God and all the forces of the world. The wet plate process has a similar compatibility and consuming kind of commitment associated with it. I often say that wet plate is not a photographic process, but a lifestyle. I discovered that both surfing and making wet plate pictures are immediate, in the now, and they require being in the moment. A dramatic example of this is described when riding in the tube of a large hollow wave. Braun Taylor writes in Surfing into Spirituality and a New Aquatic Nature Religion, the two things one hears the most from those with such experiences is how they focus attention in such an intense way, and that one truly must live in the moment to flourish in large breaking waves. Living in the moment is believed to bring peace, purpose, and wisdom. The idea is often equated with a Zen state of mind. Well, I'm not sure if photographing surfers has brought me peace or wisdom, definitely not a Zen state of mind, but it has brought me purpose. Thank you. That is the end.
You were saying that the exposure time varies. Is it something that you're controlling when you're taking the photo?
What do you mean controlling?
Like, are you taking the photo for 3 seconds, or it just kind of takes it and does with it what
So
happens? Does that make sense?
I think I know what you're trying to say. There is no way to take a light meter reading and decide this is what you should make your exposure. I just, through experience of the time of day, because this is all exposed by ultraviolet light, so between 10 and 2 are your like peak times, like your exposures get faster and then they go back to slower as the day goes on. So I don't necessarily, I have a standard like f-stop shutter speed that I work with. Sometimes, depending on what I'm trying to get, like landscapes, I'll have much longer exposures than for people. For people, I try for the shortest exposure possible, which is anywhere between 1/4 of a second and 3 seconds.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. Hi.
Thank you. These are great pictures. I have a question about sand. How did you control the sand? I know you talk about the wind.
I control nothing.
And doesn't, I mean, especially if you're coating the plates, you coat
Right.
them in the darkroom, and then do they not get, there must be sand
There
issues.
actually isn't. You know, I take a Mexican blanket, I spread it out on the sand, and I put my camera case on it, and it goes from there right to the tripod, so there's no sand there. And my dark box is on a table, which is off the sand. If it's terribly windy, yes, sand can get in things, but it's actually okay.
My question, one of my questions is around that you're a teacher as well. And how does teaching affect your practice, or vice versa? How does your practice affect your teaching, things like that?
That's a great question. Well, I recently did a workshop, a wet plate workshop in Joshua Tree, where the day before the workshop, it was pouring rain, winds at 40 miles an hour, and I can't actually teach outdoors in weather like that. But the gods must have been with me, because the next day the wind died down, the sun was shining. So that's just one element. But so working with people who are either new to the process or have even worked with it before are just so excited about it, and they are just so thrilled to be there outdoors doing this, you know, making these pictures. And it's, you know, when good things are happening, it feeds you. And I think that, you know, I'm somebody who basically only works outdoors, so there is that sort of reciprocity. I don't know if that answers your question, but.
How long does it take to learn the process, the wet plate collodion?
Well, I could show it to you in not that long a period. I could do a demo and show it to you in not that, you know, like 15 minutes, but it's really, it's like cooking, and you just have to do it over and over again until you can kind of get it in your head and hold the plate still as you're pouring the collodion kind of thing.
Thank you, amazing pictures. Did you ever contemplate surfing yourself, or did you ever want to go and take photographs of the surfers in the act of surfing rather than in this kind of pre-surfing mode?
I should have brought that really bad picture I did of everybody in Malibu surfing, but I didn't. I have taken a few surf lessons. A few very pushy surfers got me on a board. It was fantastic. I'm still not a surfer. Are you?
Sadly, no.
It's not too late for you.
Okay, so when you shoot outside, do you use artificial light or just with natural light? And what time you usually shoot when you shoot outside?
Okay, should I repeat the question so in case you didn't hear? When I shoot outside, do I use artificial light or all natural light, and what time of day do I shoot? So the best thing about wet plate is that you get to shoot when all the other photographers are just sitting around waiting for the end of the day to happen or the beginning of the day to happen. It's, like I said, between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. are your best times to shoot, because that's when the ultraviolet light is at its best. Was there, wait, another part to the question I've already forgotten? Oh yeah, it's all natural. I do, I think you could see in the video, you saw some reflectors. That is the most artificial that I work with.
Are there any more locations that you're hoping to go to? Is Australia possibly one?
I've been to Australia. I wouldn't mind South Africa if anybody knows anybody and can help me out. And Japan. And maybe some other Asian countries, yeah. Some people back there.
As this project evolved, did you give your surfers more direction in the portraits?
I think the answer to that would be yes, because I started to understand how surfers hold their boards, and certain things worked much better than others, certain positions. So the answer to that is yes, but sometimes, you know, sometimes I just still let them guide me. I often watch surfers as they're kind of waiting around to have their photograph taken, and I see how they're positioned, and I try to use that position a lot.
Hi, excuse me. I've never been exposed to this process before, but I'm kind of wondering how many plates that you, or holders you make for, you know, a day's shooting, and also not really understanding the process. Are you actually pouring and mixing the chemistry and applying it to the plate inside, or the holders inside that box, and therefore, so yeah, I'm just wondering if you could talk about the process of creating the plates, what goes into that, and how many images you shoot a day?
Well, the number of images that I could shoot in a day depends on the size that I'm working with, and also like just as how the kind of the flow of the day happens. So somewhere between, let's say for an 8x10 tintype, maybe between 8 and 12 would be the most I can do in a day. So when I get to the beach and I'm all set up and my dark box is set up, my chemicals are all pre-mixed. They live in a cooler that I sit on when I'm pouring the plates. And I take a sheet of metal, and there's a piece of plastic, I peel it off, I pour the collodion on it, I wait for it to tack up, and then I put it in the silver bath. It takes about 3 minutes for it to sensitize there. Then in the dark, with this dark cloth over the dark box, I blot it and I put it in the camera back, and I walk it back to the camera. But I always have my subject in position at this time, so when I go back with the with the camera back, I'm ready to shoot. I don't try and compose a whole photograph while somebody's holding the camera back, or the plate holder.
You actually have to create the plate for each, pour the chemistry for each photo.
For each one, yes, and I have to go through all the steps for each one. I have to sensitize the plate, I have to expose it, I go back, I develop it in the dark box, and I rinse it in the dark box, and I can do the fixing in daylight. And then I rinse it, and I have a bunch of boxes I stack them in.
How long do these plates, are they, valid, or in the sense they don't get ruined? I mean, how is there, obviously you're having to produce those right when you're taking the picture. How much time do you have to use those plates?
To use which plates? The ones that I've exposed, and I only have one camera back, one plate holder. So it holds every plate that I sensitize. So it's a one at a time thing.
But is there a time frame between sensitization and that you have to have made an image by?
Well, yes, but what that time frame is depends on wind, it depends on weather. So if it's really like a humid day, I'm by the beach, there's a lot of moisture, the plate doesn't dry out that quickly. If it were in the salt desert, the plate could dry out between the time I expose it and my dark box could be right next to it, and there could be a line of drying along the side. It really depends on the weather.
How, when you went to Hawaii, you said you couldn't bring the chemistry, couldn't fly it there. Did you have it shipped, or how did you source that?
Yeah, so unless I have the chemistry in the back of my car and I can drive, I have to have all of the chemistry shipped wherever I go. I can't fly with any of it. Collodion is explosive, and some of the and they're all considered, dangerous
Combustible.
chemicals. Yeah.
Then, so when you go overseas, how do you handle that?
I get it there.
That sounds good.
Yeah. The first time I went overseas, I shipped it like FedEx special, hazardous materials. It cost a fortune, and half of it was ruined, and it was a big mistake. But as wet plate has become more popular over time, and more people are using the process, it's easier to find new friends overseas and to connect with them and have them help you get the chemistry. Joanne?
I was just curious what you're working on now, and are you planning to extend the surf project indefinitely, or just what you're up to now?
Right now, I'm working on the film that you saw a little clip of, and I'm still kind of working on surfboards. I don't know, and it's a really good question, the last one. I don't know if I have the answer for it. I think if things evolve, yes, and if something else happens, we'll see.
I think the film is fantastic. And how long do you envision it being?
It's around 9.5 minutes, and it's meant to be on 2 separate walls. That's what the 2 screens are. And what else can I tell you about it? And it goes from the beach to the ranch. And there's a second section which has another voiceover that talks about being at the ranch. So, yeah.
It's really beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
No, and are you picturing the video being shown like an exhibition with the wet plates or prints of the wet plates, or what's the ideal venue you're thinking of right now?
Well, the ideal venue is, the Whitney Biennial. Just in
More
case you're
power
a
to you.
curator here
A
tonight.
little ambition.
It's basically a darkened room where the 2 projections would be kind of catacorn. Is that catacorny? No. Side perpendicular, I think is the word. And that would be one room, and you would come out of the film, and then you would see the actual pieces. Not necessarily the same pieces that are in the film, but you would be able to make the association between the physical tintype and the experience.
No, it's a wonderful perspective to have as a viewer, to have that experience of seeing them being made at the same time after having looked at the images. So I think it's very effective.
Thank you.
I'm just wondering, obviously this process of tintype adds so much to the photography or aesthetically, but I'm just wondering from the creative point of view, in the sense of when did you make that decision? Was there a reason why you made that decision? And is there more to the reason why, beyond the aesthetic aspect of obviously how the images look, that you use tintype?
Well, like I said before, I had sort of a breakup with photography, and part of the way that I found my way back was to, kind of stand out there on the bluffs alone and then make these platinum palladium prints in my studio. So it was a very sort of hands-on kind of process. And when I learned wet plate in 1999, it was just so much fun. I just loved it. And the idea of being outdoors and making pictures in this way made me really think about what I wanted to make pictures of, and how does a process really suit a project? How do you know when they really go together? This could be for any artist in any material. And so it really forced me to think about that and how I wanted to approach my work, and how I could say more than I wanted to say really about people when I made a portrait. I don't know if that makes sense, but
That makes a lot of sense, and that so just that ideal marriage between process and the ideas of the project that I think really it does have, and that based from all of us, thanks for going through the work and the danger, and then for producing these amazing images. Thank you, Joni.
oh, thank you.